Hello everyone, welcome. We're back. It's Tuesday again. This is feeling a little bit regular now, isn't it? We sort of went through a little spell of being a bit more sporadic, but we've been weekly, kind of regular for a while. Don't get used to it. Things will change. Anyway, welcome to the next hour of your life and mine, where I'm going to be talking at a screen, and hopefully you're going to be seeing that screen and interacting, because otherwise it gets really, really boring. But you guys are pretty good at that, so there we go. We're going to spend the next hour in that program, that one up there, Capture One. So Capture One being a raw processor piece of software that allows us to take the data that your camera records, if you save it in raw format, from the light that came into the lens and onto the sensor. All those ones and zeros, all that lovely data, sometimes doesn't come out exactly how we remember seeing it, because our brain interprets things through our eyes differently to how our camera does. And we use a raw processor, or other bits of software as well, to hopefully get a picture back to what we remember and what we saw. And that's the purpose of this, the purpose of this session for the next hour, as I say. So we're going to edit your files, not mine, in Capture One. Capture One being the software that's written by the Danish guys in Copenhagen. There are other, obviously, raw processing software bits and pieces around there. But this channel, this one, the clues in the name, is not going to cover those. So let's set the expectation from the start. Right, to everyone that is watching this in the future, you're too late. You should have been here. Look at what you missed. But if there are any questions or whatever, put them in the comments and we'll try and answer them if they're something that can be answered. Sometimes they're not. For those of you that are live, welcome. Well done, you made it. But please interact, heckle, annoy, question, comment, whatever you want. We've got some feedback this time, today. We've got some bits from Ash and some bits from Roger, and we're going to talk about those from last time. So if you didn't watch last time's session, some of today, well, I'll try and explain it, but some of today is going to be a sort of feed on from there. But anyway, let's just cover a couple of things on there. So Prasad, interesting day, started with the new X2D2 announcement. Yeah, I saw that. So Hasselblad have launched the X2D2. Interesting. It's certainly an evolution rather than a revolution, I'd say. They've upped the image stabilization for sure. They've upped a couple of bits in there, but generally speaking, it's not a huge leap from what I can work out so far of the reviews. Who knows? Of course, at the moment, you're still not able to edit anything from a Hasselblad camera in Capture One. There are some hacks and ways of doing it, but you are primarily going to be using their own focus software to do your raw edits. When I talked about color correction in the comments, Powell, correct, no way will we be talking about a direct color checker passport integration in Capture One, I'm afraid. Maybe in the future, who knows, but right now, no. So, I think that's our announcements today. Well, it's not really, that's your announcements today. If anyone else has got any, births, deaths, marriages, fun things, divorces, we should announce those now as well. They're more popular. Let's have a look at Capture One. So today's version of Capture One that we are editing in is an update. An update happened in the last week called 16.6.5, a really catchy version name. But the key part is, and I'm going to use a Grover pointer. Oh, this one is the major release. This is the minor release. This is the point release. So what you're buying if you buy a Perpetual license, this is David Grover from Capture One, by the way, for anyone that's confused as he is. What you're buying when you buy a Perpetual license is this number, the middle one, which means any update that you see issued from Capture One when you buy a Perpetual license that happens to the right of this dot is yours as well, because you bought the rights to it when you bought this version. Any update that happens to this number, however, so when that goes to 16.7, if you bought a Perpetual license, it is not included in your license. You would have to look at an upgrade, which comes at a fee. If you're on a subscription with Capture One, so go to capture1.com, you will find that there are different options. You've got Capture One All-in-One, which is mobile tools, so the iOS app, the iPad app, and some cloud stuff as well. You've got Capture One Pro. You've got Capture One Studio, which is what we run here. Doesn't mean that you need that if you're not doing most things e-commerce. Generally, you're not going to need the Studio version. But there are different versions, different flavors for everyone. And if you're on the subscription, you should ideally be on the latest version possible for you to run on your computer and your operating system. So there we go. Stuart, watching this while celebrating our 58th wedding anniversary. You like to live dangerously. Love it. You better have presents ready. Right, before we go into Capture One itself, how do you get your files to us? Well, you send them there. So you go to paulreeferlive.wetransfer.com, you upload your file, you upload your name, and a brief description of what you want to have a look at in that file. If you do not include your name, we cannot include your file. There's another thing as well, which we've noticed recently. People have been setting WeTransfer limits to be like 2 days. It's not going to happen, boys and girls. You need to be setting that WeTransfer limit to at least a week when you upload it. That gives us time to be able to download before the next session. So please upload at will. Upload your raw files, your edited files. You can export as an EIP out of Capture One with all of your edits that you've already done, so we can have a look. And that's what you're going to see today with people's files. Quick things before we go in. So number one, you have 4 days left to get into August's big image competition with the option of winning a not real Growfie. But to do that, you need to go onto Facebook. You need to go into the Facebook group, which is a happy little place. We have a bit of a no whatevers rule, which seems to have stuck, which is quite nice because I see lots and lots of Facebook groups where that doesn't stick. But anyway, so go into there, upload your images, and we can see next week whether or not you get the golden globe, as it were. Speaking of competitions, before that one finishes, this one finishes. So 28th, which is Thursday, the British Institute's competition, annual competition for photography, closes its digital rounds. There's 2 rounds. First is digital submissions. Then of those submissions that are successful, the top, I think it's 5 from each category, will be asked to submit print, maybe 10. Can't remember which one, for display, for judging, and that will be displayed in a gallery at the Holborn Studios in London, which is quite funky. So if you want to get in on that, you literally have 2 days to do that. It's not a big task to do digital submission, but you have got to get onto it. Reminder for those of you that want to go out and about playing on the Dorset coast, which is where I live, have a look at the Teamwork guys. They've got a workshop going on with me for 4 days. In March, but you're going to need to book that ahead of time. You can't just rock up to that one. Very secret. And then finally, here's an interesting one. We have, I think at last count, I think there are 5 of these left. 5. And I can tell you all now that each one of them, it turns out, is costing us money to send. Because by the time we add up the cost of the magazine, the cost of the packaging, not even the time taken, actually, that's been sort of absorbed, but the extra little free surprise that's going into every single one of the first 50, which is quite interesting, but the secret surprise that's going in there, and the postage worldwide, seems the postage rates have gone up quite significantly for a little box. So if you want to cost us more money, as I say, there are 5 of them left, so get on it, because it seems very few people from the UK have bought these things. You're all from all over the place. So we've got them sending out all over the world, which is quite interesting to watch. But anyway, so those Docu Magazine things, which is a collaboration we've done with Thomas to create an edition of a series of magazines that he works on to prove that print is not dead. But we're bunging in something extra that definitely proves that print is not dead in there. So there you go. How elusive. Right, let's get on to Capture One. And we mentioned that the version at the moment is 16.6.5. What is new in 16.6.5? So the first off, I'll come back to the biggest one anyway. So you've got the function of storing things like normalize and guides and folders into the cloud now. So more and more of Capture One settings are being stored in Capture One's cloud, which means that if you're working between different machines, different platforms, different locations, then your settings can all be moved across. And that does make life easier. If I'm using my laptop versus desktop, that's all pretty helpful. They've opened up some Apple script. Most of you won't care about that. Those of you that do will know what that means, but it means that you can now read the live view status. There's some stuff about XMP reading, and it supports the new Sony, what is it, RXR13? Sony, honestly, your marketing, get with it. Can we work on a new way of describing your cameras? But anyway, so the latest version of that camera is now supported in Capture One. But there were two other things that are in Capture One that are relatively big for those that are interested in it. Let's go into Capture One itself, and let's start with this one. So the first one being, you now have the ability in your preferences in Capture One, so top menu, preferences, whether or not you wish to include the output folder in your session folders. So if you use sessions, most important thing, so if you use catalogs, this doesn't necessarily apply to you, but if you're using sessions, one of the things that can be annoying, and for those that don't quite understand the relevance of this, is if you want to search for an image, for example, in Capture One, you've got all your quick browse stuff, so we can go into the little magnifier up there. We can search through all of your session folders and everything for an image. But quite often when we're outputting, we'll output different sizes, right? And different versions. So you'll have a JPEG for web, a JPEG with watermark, a JPEG for approval, a TIFF file for print, a TIFF file for high-res digital, different color spaces, etc., etc. And they're in your output folder. And normally you'd have them structured into different folders. Well, of course, the problem being that then you end up with 7 or 8 results for that file that you were looking for, and you were probably looking just for the original, whether it was the EIP or the raw file with its edits. So the ability to untick this, and this is the important bit, it defaults to being included because that's what Capture One normally does. But with this function, you can now uninclude, or what's the exclude? That's the one. Uninclude. Idiot. You can exclude the output folder from those results and everything, so from Capture One's visibility effectively, which means you're not going to get any of the complication and confusion of all those different versions floating around. So remember, the default is on, but if you now want to turn it off, you can. Secondly, blemish protection. I was going to say removal. For those of you that remember, in 16.6, it launched this little happy face here. And I was trying it on a face. How could you ignore that face? This is something we were testing with the GFX 102 some time ago, to be fair. It has taken me a long time to edit these photos. But we were doing some testing. Fair play. Pretty good, isn't it? But anyway, the ability for Capture One to remove blemishes and retouch faces was introduced in 16.6. It's been further refined, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5, here we are. And in 16.6.5, they've introduced an extra one, which is protect blemishes. Now, unfortunately, while this is quite a cool face, it's not been detected as a face. And I'm bearing in mind this channel is mostly not people and portraits. We're not going to go into this heavily, but if you want a bit of a steer for how heavily Capture One are going in on this, I haven't seen a new icon in that toolbar for a long, long time. Now, of course, you can customize your toolbars. You can play with things up here, but what I would say is it's quite significant for them to add a whole new little button up here. Now, this button allows you to put a brush or an eraser, so a bit like a mask, onto blemishes. So what was happening, and you've now got this function in here to manage that. What was happening was when people were using the blemish removal, it was removing too much, which you can understand. Obviously, the system has an algorithm that's used to try and find what is a blemish and what is not, and it read maybe sometimes a little bit overzealously. So you now have the ability to paint in and say, this is not a blemish. This is not a blemish, for example. They are eyes, in fact. Now, you'd hope that Capture One wouldn't see them as blemishes, but for example, and this wouldn't apply because it doesn't detect the face, but this fly here, I might want to keep so we can protect it. And you've got the option, obviously, to do the eraser to get rid of it. And then with the bits that you've protected, you can actually effectively remove the blemish removal or its application of it onto it. So for those of you that do portrait shooting and you've got some of you may have seen issues with it removing too much, or the problem is you remove, there was no real gradient or granularity. My vocabulary today is awful. there was no real granularity in terms of which blemishes to take care of. So it did a pretty good job of leaving like freckles intact and so on. But if you wanted enough blemish removal, but then found that it removed too much, it's not like it was a mask. You couldn't then undo that bit. But now, effectively, you can. You can protect, so it's like an inverse mask. You tell it which bits you want to protect. That looks like a really scary elephant, actually, now, as a result of that, so let's not do that. Right. Let's go. Oh, Alan, can I upload a light painting photography? Of course you can. We like light painting. It's just not many people upload it. So, and is it a landscape style? It depends. Who are you light painting? If it's light painting a landscape, no problem. If it's light painting a person, it's still light. We still edit it the same way. It could be the effect of traveling too much to Japan. I think I have 3 trips there this year. There we go. I could lose all of my English vocabulary very quickly. Right, let's get into our images. So, Alan, you know, as well as everyone else from last week, we are going to focus on your image today. But before we get there, we're going to cover a couple of things. So the first thing is Roger sent in this image last week from here, which was a bit too harsh, to here, which was the edit that we finished on. And if I go into here, we see that we've got less haloing around here. It looks less cut out. But Roger sent a note in saying there's a problem. And I agree, Roger, there is a problem, but it's not the problem that you think. The problem was Roger took a picture of his screen while watching and found that even his eyes bled slightly as a result of watching the edit. Now, we're going to cover a couple of things. So, Roger's made the point, which is this is the JPEG from Roger's edit. This is the EIP. And I don't disagree. If I go back to here, here is the EIP that you had. They're kind of similar, yeah? So the EIP for all of you on your screen from last week to today is the same. The JPEG that Roger exported from that EIP is pretty much the same. A little bit of color shift, but pretty much the same. So why, when Roger's watching on YouTube, does it look like this? Well, there's a couple problems here. Two big problems. First is, I notice on here this is Firefox. So you're watching it in Firefox on here. Firefox had a problem. I don't use Firefox for many different reasons. This is obviously a phone picture of a screen, and I'll explain why that's the second huge problem with this way of working. So Firefox was known to have a color shift. There was a challenge with watching YouTube videos on Firefox. Overall, just bear in mind what you're watching on your screens right now. I'm going to get rid of that one because it's going to hurt people's eyes. What you're watching on your screen right now is interpreted from my color space on my screen, which right now on my screen here is photography P3 on an XDR display. That's being interpreted into effectively Rec 709, I think it is, as it's made into an MP4. That's the native color space for videos in YouTube. I think it may be BT 709 as it's known with them, but it's a video color space, not a stills color space, not a display color space. It's a video color space. And then, because they have to present it onto your screens, you're seeing it then translated into sRGB, which is the default output for most of the screens and certainly most web browsers. So you're seeing an image that I see on my screen translated twice into what you're seeing in your browser. So the browser is really important in terms of what color space it's rendering in. Now you will see, because I did a bit of homework, in the description below, Roger, there was an article from a couple years ago, granted, but there's lots of them, huge amounts of them, that talks about Firefox's color space and how you can check what color space Firefox is using, whether it's using its native sRGB or whether it's trying to apply your display color profile. So number one, there may be a Firefox thing. Please try in Chrome, have a look. Please try in Safari, have a look, see if it's any better. Number two, you've done the impossible problem. This and this are phone captures of your screen. This is auto white balancing, and it's also enhancing what it sees. So this picture here is not what your screen actually displays or what it was meant to display. The problem is that if you're comparing this and this and this, these two are taken with a camera phone. This is taken as a JPEG as your export. They will never be the same. If I take a picture with my phone of this right now, it will look completely different. In fact, I did it. So I took a picture with my iPhone of the same piece of video here that you did. And they look very, very, very different. So the problem's going to be that you're going through so many different layers. You're going through already what's been interpreted into video, into the screen. You're then taking the color space of whatever camera you're using, whether it's a phone, whether it's a full camera or whatever. It doesn't make really that much difference. But you're reinterpreting color again into that camera's color science. Then you're bringing it into a program that interprets it into the display color space. Then we're saving it as a JPEG in another color space. That's a challenge. There are ways of doing it, but the problem is that every step that you take risks a deviation from what was actually originally there. B, if you are going to do a comparison to check a screen, and I've done this actually in terms of checking color space, you actually need to put your camera literally on a tripod, lock in everything on it, lock in its white balance, its shutter speed, its ISO, everything, lock in its focus. Do not let it deviate. Set the white balance if necessary to 5000 and tint 0, and do literally like for like in the same ambient light, same everything, because even the ambient light will change the quality of the image that's coming from your screen. There's too many variables. So yes, absolutely, screens will have differences. Screens will have variables and variety. But a lot of it will come down to the color space your screen is on. A lot of it will come down to what browser you're using. In general, we just can't guarantee exactly what you're seeing at the other end. What I can tell you is, if I look at this is, as I say, an iPhone picture of the YouTube video from last week of that, yeah, it's the same. Michael, would a screen capture be better? It will, because it's in its native color space, but you've still got to display it somehow. But yes, if you save that as a JPEG, in theory, it would match what the screen thinks it's outputting. Okay, so then to Ash's image last week. So if you remember, we talked about this moon shot. Just get rid of it. So the moon shot out here, and I said there's something odd here. Because, and in part, there's something about the fact that it was this 48mm thing for the moon to be that size in the overall frame, the overall width of the frame, and so on. And it turns out, so Ash got in touch, great. It turns out it was actually a panoramic stitch of several images. And so you've got an ultra wide shot out of a 48mm, okay. And there was noise reduction processing done on it, which makes sense. Now, going back to what we talked about last week, just cover this second. So Keith, what preset would you use? So without going into huge detail on this, and I'm not going to, it depends on where you're outputting to. And this is what I'd say to everyone. I see lots of people go and buy ASO monitors and they never print. There is no point. An ASO monitor is great for emulating paper, but if every one of your people that are viewing your images is going to consume that image on a high contrast, glossy phone screen, XDR display, TV, whatever, then you're editing to the wrong medium. You need to be editing to the same medium that your viewers are viewing it on. So if most of your images are consumed digitally, think about the screens that people use and edit on those. Now, in terms of the color space and the color profile, then it depends on where you want to calibrate to. So if you're printing, you'd calibrate to paper. If you're on display, then you might want to calibrate to P3, which is like an extended sRGB. Most browsers now support P3. It's quite a nice color space. It's not as big as Adobe RGB, and in fact, most displays can't render that. So just bear in mind, it's less about what you're editing and more about what you're editing to in terms of the viewer. Right. So Ash's shot when we go to the moon. Let's go to the moon. I mentioned last week, so a couple of things. Number one was there's something a bit weird. And just to reiterate, this patterning here, I'm going in really, really tight so you can see it. This patterning is quite a normal thing that comes from heavy noise reduction. It does make it cleaner as a picture, but if we look at the comparison of these two shots, so here being the raw, here being there, in the raw, we didn't really have that same level or same amount of patterning in there. And even if I were to pull up let's just pull down some exposure, and let's make it the pinky blue color that's very similar, and maybe let's add in a load of clarity and some structure. I start seeing patterns start to arrive, but it's nowhere like this. This is from heavy noise reduction, and it can be problematic. Then the second thing was, as I moved around and got to the moon, let's just get them relatively similar, you notice the difference. So through sharpening and noise reduction, you start getting some extra artifacts, which are quite interesting. Let's just have a look. So yes, we've managed to get the moon a bit sharper, but look at this extra little line around there. There's something artificial with it, and that's a problem. And it's either where it's software based, or it's where something's been removed out of it and whatever. And this is a challenge with trying to effectively make something that's unsharp sharp in the same frame as everything else. Now, the moon is moving, obviously. Even at a 13th of a second, you'll probably have a slight movement there. But the issue here is at 48 millimeters, that moon is very, very small. You're not going to get quite the level of detail in there. To get it this sharp and to get it this clean requires so much processing that unfortunately it starts to become very artificial. And I would say this is artificial. This is the original, but it does need some help. Now, that help doesn't have to come in the form of heavy processing. So let me just see where that crop was. There to there. Okay, in fact, let's just try the adjustments I made last week and see where we get. Not bad. Not perfect, but not bad. We are at a 1 point or 1/2. Let's go in. So yes, there's some shadow lifting. Yes, there's a load of other stuff that we've got to consider with it. But in general, let's just go down to our image layer and go into our levels. This is global, remember, so I'm not doing anything clever here at this point. We get to there. Now, obviously, I've got the shadow of the original AI mask, which is wrong. So let's just clear that mask. And let's AI mask the sky. And the rocks, that's also going to be wrong. So let's clear that mask. And let's AI mask the rocks again. Oops, not with the sea. We might want to refine the rock mask and go wider there. Where's this other shadow coming from? From there, from the adjustment layer of the sea. So let's clear that mask. And that was this is why we label our layers, boys and girls, because it means that we can know exactly what it was that layer did. And there's a ticking off for me, myself. So let's just go into there. Now, again, not perfect. I might want to change at our image layer some of the toning, a bit more of that. Yeah, Ash, you're on. Yes, so yeah, the moon shade, and it will. When it tries to stitch stuff, you're going to find that you get a little bit of aspect change. In part, so here's the thing that you got to bear in mind. It actually, you might not have done. Depends on the algorithm. So when you're stitching, especially with the moon in motion, picture 1 and picture 2 have the moon in 2 different places. So quite often the stitching software will ignore the moon from one and only put it in from the other, but I'm not sure exactly what would have happened in this case. Let's just pull up our exposure. Okay, and let's now protect our highlights and protect our white. So I have the moon there. If I really want to focus completely on that moon, it's a nice little mask there. I can add in a bit of clarity, a bit of structure, even a bit of dehaze. I could warm it up a little bit to get to that sort of yellowy color that you sort of have in there already. We could go into our details tab And let's just name it again, telling off to self, and put in some extra sharpening, smaller radius and smaller threshold, so we don't have a negative effect, as it were. I'm just going to refine it out a little bit. Okay, so again, it's not perfect. We're not going to dwell on this, but let me just go to this moon and this moon. So bear in mind, as I say, we're not matching like for like. The tones are different. It needs to come maybe there. In fact, actually, the blues I think you've got, is it these? Yeah, they need to sort of shift a little bit to get more close to where you were. But anyway, you get the idea. Let's go into this moon here. Now, the bottom one is obviously not as clear and shiny and sharp as the top one. I get that. But I would say it looks a hell of a lot better. Just because it is real. It's the real moon from that real night. It hasn't been software augmented. It hasn't been enhanced too much to the point where you've got all of this stuff around it. And you know, I love the fact that software can now allow us to do some really clever stuff. But if it's starting to add patterns like this into the background, that sharpening and noise reduction gone too far. In here, we've got the same, ability to soften that water. I mean, granted, you mentioned about long exposure versus short exposure for the water. Am I a fan of it? No, but you can blend a single shot moon to a longer exposure for the water. We can certainly get these rock surfaces coming out more. So we can go into let's go to our rocks. Sorry, there. We can pull up our shadows. We can pull up a load more clarity into those rocks, because we don't. Last week, if you remember, we wanted to be careful that we're not pulling up too much clarity, because there was already noise reduction over it, which is just going to make it look noisy and bitty. This gives us a huge amount more latitude. So I would stay away from the noise reduction, certainly out as a TIFF, and I would play more in the raw if I were you. It may not be perfect, but no photography is, honestly. And a lot of this is just about getting it, the reality is as good as it can be. Yeah. Right. So there we go. That was last week's. Number one, be really, really careful with display, especially with taking pictures of a display, because remember, you're transiting again several different color spaces. So this, be careful with. This is what I expect to see. If you're not seeing this, Roger, hopefully that's. How would you know if you're not seeing that? Right. So maybe I'll put a reference JPEG in the description so you can see. But have a look at the link that I put in there about Firefox color spaces and see if it helps. Ash, this one, just be really careful with that software, because when I do show the comparison, you can really see it. So yeah, it's just a tricky one. Right. Speaking of tricky ones, let's get to Alan's. Mount Cook. This is I love Mount Cook. I don't love it literally, but it's pretty cool. So down in New Zealand, there is a contrast problem here, just before anyone flags. So in almost the opposite to Ash's challenge, here what we've got is, excuse me, an exposure for the mountain to get all this color in here, which has lifted it quite a lot, but it's obviously pushed the moon too much. And I mentioned last week, there is a case for blending more than one image. I would suggest that if you're going to do it authentically, then they needed to be captured within seconds of each other, not on different days, certainly not different weeks. And hopefully, and I see this quite a lot, hopefully the same hemisphere, people borrowing galaxy shots from the southern hemisphere to post on images from the northern hemisphere. And trust me, you will get caught out, because the astro guys are really hot on that stuff. It is obvious when you do it. So be careful with blending to be authentic, but if your camera has a limitation in terms of its dynamic range, use an HDR approach. get one shot for the highlights, one shot for the shadows, and one shot for the midtones, and you can always blend them. You can blend it within Capture One by selecting more than one shot. Whoops. And going to merge to HDR. There are other HDR tools available. Some of them will be better, some of them will be worse. Things like Affinity do a very good job of blending, but to each their own. In absence of that, let's just look back, so before and after. So here is our challenge, which is, and it's really subtle, and you wouldn't have noticed this in your camera. Let's create a floating tool of a histogram so you can see it. So we've got huge amounts of data down in the left-hand side. Shadows, there's stuff down here that's underexposed. If I turn my exposure warning on, let's just create a new variant. So this is pure out of camera. My exposure warning is only flagging the moon. This big bit of black dark shadow down here has been exposed for correctly if you're protecting the shadows. And we talk about this quite a lot. Which do you prefer? Protect the highlights, protect the shadows? Personally, I'll say it a million times, protect the highlights. Because we can recover a shadow, you can definitely not recover a highlight. So dangerous but recoverable, impossible to recover. Think about those two. So the place that I'd be really careful of protecting is up here, not down here. Ideally, you want to protect both of them. Filter could help, lots of different things. The challenge being that in here, this looks really innocent, right? But in Alan's shot here, after the edit, you've got this little spike. It still looks pretty innocent, but that is what's killing this moon. We've got some crushed shadows down here and some spiky stuff here. That's what gives us this lovely contrast. So it goes from being quite flat to quite heavily contrasted. So the edit, I like this style of editing, got no issue with it, but given the limitations of this data, the first thing I'm going to do if I were to start this edit from scratch, curve, linear response. So this is the standard curve. Now, because it's shot on a Fuji, it means that you've got access to all the recipes that are in the Fuji as well. Or the film simulation, sorry, that are in the Fuji as well. But the default, if you don't select one, is film standard. That's the same as any other camera is going to produce. Well, if I choose linear response, so first thing that people see is it gets darker, right? It's not actually getting darker as such. It's just not lifting the shadows as part of its processing. So here's my linear response versus here's my out of Capture One's default. So default to the right, linear response to the left. Okay. Right. Sad. Good question. So landscapes. So in Facebook, we talked about. Actually, yeah. For those of you that didn't notice, who didn't notice? Capture One's website that people were complaining that they'd taken away the landscape thing from the product page. A, they hadn't taken it away. There was never a separate landscape thing there. But B, there now is a separate landscape thing there. Isn't that cool? See? People power-ish. They'd never forgotten you, but now they're showing that love, you know? So if you go to capture1.com, go to the genres, you will find that landscape is in there again. Yes. Now, in what Prasad's referring to is I mentioned HDR as a wish in Capture One. I don't mean exposure blending at all. What I mean by HDR is it is now possible with cameras, so including phone cameras, but also you can actually do it with a pretty good, I've actually created them out of phase 1 files now. The dynamic range doesn't have to stop at 255 on a display. So if you've got an XDR display, or effectively an extended dynamic range display, 255 is the point of white, and then we go into bright white beyond that. So if you've got traffic trails and moons and sunlight and stuff like that, you'll see it on your phones. If you've got a phone with an HDR capable display, sometimes when you're going through things like Instagram or Facebook, if it's a video taken natively on the phone, you'll find it's brighter than a normal photograph. You cannot print that level. You can't print a 512 out of 255 level because paper doesn't glow at the moment. Maybe it will, radioactive, who knows. But on display, it can look phenomenal. So when I'm talking about I want HDR output, I don't mean blending. I mean I want the ability to push the whites or the bright parts of the histogram beyond 255, because that looks so cool on a display, especially cityscapes, especially at night. That's what I was talking about. Not blending, because I don't like blending in general, but sometimes it's a necessary evil. So here is our normal. Here is our our linear response. And if we zoom in to our moon, just how I'm doing this, so I've selected both images by holding down the command key or control key in Windows. Hold down the shift key while you're doing any operation like zooming in or out, and it will do both of them at the same time in the same place in unison. Kind of handy. So we do not have all the detail in the moon. We know that. It was already overexposed. But if I look at the left to the right, look at how nice and clean this looks compared to this one. I mean, it's exposed to the point where we can see the dark side of the moon. Oh, if we had a sound overlay. I'm missing my DJ world. Right. But at least we've got some definition here. We don't have this sort of awkward glow because it's not overdone. Can we recover anything back from this moon? Well, let's have a look. Let's take our exposure, and this is the way that we test, all the way down. And the answer is no. It doesn't matter how much I pull this down. All I'm getting here is just more of flat white. There's nothing there. At standard exposure, if I look at my numbers on the top of the screen, 255 is all the way across, 255 on average. If I pull it down by 1.5 stops, it's 215 across the board. It's not really changing. Down by 3 stops, 145 across the board. In other words, there's no detail, there's no texture, there's no change there. I'll give you the example that we're looking for. If there was, let's take Ash's image. Thanks, Ash. Go into the moon. Imagine. You're going to have to imagine this. We had a moon that was like that. So 255, 255 across. When I pull the exposure, so this is obviously starting from an overexposed, but imagine that was 0. When I pull the exposure down, I would expect to start seeing variations. And that's because there is data that's recorded here. There wasn't data recorded in Alan's, unfortunately. So Alan's is pushed just a bit too far. And we know that by pulling the exposure down and seeing that those numbers just don't change. They're all in sync the whole time. God, it's like Pop Masters, right? In sync. How many bands can we get in? Right. Not a band I listened to, honest. Right. Now, the problem with linear response is if Alan's goal is to get to here, ta-da, that needs quite a lot of contrast. And we've taken all the contrast away by starting with linear response, but that's not a problem. So let's think about what we want to protect and things that we don't. So number one, I want to protect this moon. So we're going to create a layer called moon, and we're simply going to add an AI brush onto it. I might want to extend that brush a little bit, and in fact we might even want to use magic brush just to really expand out towards the edges. So maybe we put a little bit of tolerance in there. Let's just check that. Looking pretty good. It's also got this stuff here, so the glow and the glare out of it. I'm not worried about that too much, but actually if we are going to take the sky down, I don't want that to really interfere. So even though I've done that with the AI brush, I'm now going to pull in a solid brush, old school brush, and just get rid of, hopefully you can see this on your screens, the scraggly bits, basically. Because we don't want them. We don't want them in our mask. We're not trying to protect those. And what will happen is if I start making changes to the sky, these bits will start creating little sort of dark bumps, right? Because they're protected. So let's not do that. Now, with that layer, the moon layer, I am going to pull down our exposure to start with. Not too much. I'm going to refine the mask a little bit so we don't see the edges. Hit apply. Good. Now I've got the moon separated from the image layer. So the image layer itself. Huge amount of data down here, not a lot up here. Turn your exposure warning on. It's going to tell you the moon is overexposed. We knew that already. I'm going to pull this all the way down until I start seeing, there we go, some issues with other overexposed areas. So the moon is gone. Forget that. But wow, I know, Alan, you did say on your note that this was underexposed, but yeah, man, there's some work to do here. Right, but we now have a pretty nice lift in that overall image. It's not quite there yet. It's not quite perfect, but we're getting there. Okay, turn my exposure warning off. And I've still mostly protected the moon, but it has, remember, even though the moon is a separate layer, it has been affected by everything underneath it in the image layer. How would we avoid that? Well, there's two things. Number one, I can counter it with that layer, pulling it down. Number two, image layer, right click, move adjustments to a new layer. Why? Because I can't do anything with a mask on the image layer. There's no mask for the image layer. It's just 100%. But with my global adjustments, and some of you will know, we used to call this, what we still do, global adjustments. With my global adjustments, I can go in, just like before, and say, even though I've pulled all these levels to a crazy amount, please don't apply them to my moon. So it has, oh, I don't like actually that. Don't like what it's done there. Even though it's protected the moon, it hasn't done the outside sky bit. Not a fan there. So we're going to do it differently. I told you this is live. If only I had an intersecting mask, I could do something clever with that. So let's create a different way of doing this, which is a soft gradient, which means that we are applying this lifting to the bottom more than we are the top. With a gradient, if I hold down the Option key, I can make it asymmetrical. If I hold down the Shift key, it does it around the center, okay? Rather than like that. So we can use this to say, by the time I get to the moon, I want it to be pretty dark. But, oops, sorry. But down here, in fact, I want to go like that. Pretty dark there. Just move this down. But by the time you get to the mountains here, I want you to be pretty much fully applied. So this is 100%, this is 50%, this is 0% up here. So I'm protecting the upper parts, protecting the moon, but I'm lifting the down below. So we go from there, and there, and there. Okay. We may come back to this because it may be a bit less subtle than I want, but we'll see. Now, overall with the sky, so that's my global adjustments. The moon layer I kind of don't need anymore, but let's leave it in there at half just in case. So new layer, sky. Let's create a lovely little mask over there, and let's look at what it's captured. Turn to grayscale to see where we're at. Done a pretty good job. It's left the moon there. So, okay. And I'm just, remember, I'm being very cautious now because I'm wary of the fact that that glow around the moon is coming back every time I try and do anything here. So I might want to keep an eye on that. So let's lift our shadow a little bit. Let's lift our saturation a little bit. And let's lift our contrast a little bit. Maybe we want to put in a tiny bit of clarity into there. Okay. So now I'm looking at it. I'm like, am I happy with that sky? Yeah, pretty much. If I do a bit of dehaze, does that help me? It does a bit, but I'm starting to get some artifacts over here, some noise, and that's coming from the fact that we've lifted the shadows a bit too much. So I'm going to put that back down, put that back down as well, and maybe we just back away that contrast a bit, but lift up a tiny bit of exposure. Okay. I'm pretty happy with that sky. So next, mountain. Now this is going to be a little bit annoying because we've got to kind of get all the bits of the Mount Cook range. But hopefully with my AI brush clicking, it will get most of it. The bits that it doesn't get, remember, we can always refine, which think of it in a way of stretching what you've selected. So I'm going to go to see my mountains. I can always hand paint these as well, remember, so I can go to a normal brush. I know that this should be filled across there, so let's fill it across there. This should be filled in. I'll just show you. There, it's just this line. So let's fill it in. So remember, just because you started with your AI brush doesn't mean you have to finish with it. Clouds we talked about last week. Don't go too crazy. Let's try and just do a little erase across here because I don't really want to pick that up too much there. Knowing that I'm about to refine, okay? So it's a very different mindset when you know that you're going to be doing some refining. You'll be a little more sloppy, frankly, with your masking. So let's refine it. Not a huge amount, just maybe less than 100, maybe up to there. Apply. Okay, good. Tobias, why not invert the moon mask? I think you're talking about back along. We could have done, but if I just wanted the sky without the moon, I'd then have to subtract the mountains and stuff. Not quite so there. Okay, so mountain sorted in terms of its mask. Now let's lift up our exposure a bit. Don't push it. Contrast a bit. Maybe we want to lift our shadows a tiny bit. Maybe we want to lift a bit of clarity into there. Bit of structure. Be careful with structure on a low light image because structure is another word for noise, effectively. So we do risk bringing up some noise with it. Dehaze could be our friend here, but it's doing what I thought. It's going a little bit too blue. So if I get rid of if I choose the blue color on the mountain, you notice I used the picker there and I chose the bit that had gone this weird bluey color, and it goes more neutral. Pretty good. So we go from there to there. And then our last bit, so our foreground. So let's create new layer, foreground. AI mask. AI, however you say it. Ali G used to say I. I miss those days when that was what AI meant. Just some guy being an idiot. That means the end of humanity. Right, there is our foreground. You can see the AI mask has not got it perfect. We knew that it wouldn't. So again, we're gonna, now if you don't get stuff that's up close, just try zooming in to use your AI mask and you might find that it gets it a bit better. But if it doesn't, don't force it. Just, spludge. That word, spludge, whatever. But literally just, old school. We used to do this all the time. You used to have to draw your whole mask in the first place, right? Even auto mask was still you drawing it. Now we've been spoiled with AI. Yes, it helps at the edges. Yes, it helps with shapes. But don't forget, you can always just draw your own mask. And if you're worried, remember, again, if it's a bit sloppy, it doesn't matter too much because we're planning on refining it to blend it in. So there is my mask. Let's refine it. Not a huge amount. Let's go down to about 45. Hit apply. Good. Now we're going to lift up our exposure on the pathway. Quite a way, actually. And we're going to warm it up. And we're going to get rid of some of that green tint out of it. So it makes sense. It doesn't make sense to have this green if the light in the sky is up there in pink. Back to our sky layer. Well, let's try and push that a little pinker. Maybe a little warmer. Depends, actually, the angle or direction you want to go. You could go cooler. Don't mind that. Not too much. Maybe 7,000 would do it. Yep. We can pull up our brightness. We'll come back to brightness in a second. Ash, in answer to your question, what monitor do you use? The one that I'm looking at right now to edit is an Apple XDR display. The one there that we use for calibration and stuff is an Apple Studio display. We've used them all over the times, including the EASO ones, but for most stuff now, especially the way that I print or I output, again, it doesn't make sense anymore, unfortunately. So this may feel a bit too pink for a lot of people. We might want to back that away a little bit, back away that foreground a little bit to there. Okay, in fact, we could even pull that quite a way back there in the foreground. We could actually even pull back some saturation a touch. Yeah, that's better. Now, this is different, Alan, to what you had there, for sure. I get it. But it's just a different process. To me, though, what I've got in this different edit here is a lot more detail. So if I look at the cloud or the mountains out here, you see how this clumping has happened. And it's through the edit. So color shifting we can deal with. We can do that anytime. But where you've tried to recover an awful lot through the noise reduction, through maybe some clarity tools and stuff like that, I would leave it as a little bit noisy because at least you've got the shape and the definition. Whereas here, I think in here you're losing too much. And when you print it, you'll notice this more than the noise here. The noise you can sort of get away with as grain, for want of a better word. For color, let's just create a clone of that variant. So I'm just going to pull that up here. If we wanted to match Alan's more, then we'd go to our global adjustments. We would cool it down like that. And a little bit of a less pink tint. We would go to our sky and we would cool it down. We would go to our mountain. Do we cool it down? Actually, what we probably do is just pull back our saturation. And we go to our foreground and we definitely pull that saturation back and we pull this to be quite cold. But you get the idea. So these two are two different edits of the same mountain, but the details in it, the recovery of the moon and so on, is just done separately to the color change. So use your white balance, use your color tools and whatever to do that color change. But don't keep that separate from the details, from the contrast, from the clarity, from all those other bits. You can change color later on. You know, these two are a little bit more similar. If you didn't like this amount here, we can change that, of course. You know, you can get to whatever you like. You know, we could go into almost there, pull up some saturation a bit more. Overall, just to help picture it here, if this isn't bright enough, you might want to use the brightness slider, which is a bit more sympathetic than pulling up here anymore, because this will blow some of the other stuff with the moon. You might then want to actually add in a bit of contrast, having pulled up the brightness slider, because it loses contrast. You can do that with the HDR tools as well, but these two are two different edits of the same picture. But when I look at things like the moon, you're never going to get this perfect. We all know that. But I'd say this is a much cleaner moon than this one. And the mountains are certainly a lot cleaner between these two. They're certainly more detailed. Yeah. So hopefully that helps. Short answer, the exposure needs to be blended in some way, shape or form if you want to capture these two together. But even with that rescue, if you start with linear response and you start with layers and removing the bit that's the problem before you start attacking the entire image, you might get to somewhere a bit better. Tom, I'm glad actually we're going to end on this one. So Tom's question was, I need to make this as an old picture, I think you said, from like 2019 or something like that, 2009 or 19, either way, or 2019, there we go, on a Sony RX100 Mark VI. There we go. Lovely naming structure again. The question was, I want to make it look dry and arid. What should I do? And my answer would be, do exactly what you've done. Because if I look here, this is dry and arid. What you've done is you've enhanced some contrast. Arguably, I might have lifted some of these shadows a bit more. I might look at the sky and say I'm actually going to desaturate some of the blue out of it even more. Because when we've got stuff that's really arid and dry, you tend not to have, unless you're in somewhere like Deadvalley or whatever, you don't have that real stark contrast. It tends to feel quite dry. If I click on here on my sky layer, which has been handily done, this is in the blue here, so maybe try and even that up. The other way of evening up the sky, of course, is in the skin tone tool, so it's already been done there in terms of hue uniformity. I'm going to go further and say do it as saturation as well and do it as lightness, just to try and sort of even that up around there. And I'd maybe move that dot to be here. But overall, this color grade is nice. The global changes that you've done, there's no issue there. As I say, the contrast, I might have been tempted just to knock back a little bit. So it's this part of your Luma curve, so lifting that up a touch. But does it look dry? Yes, it does. Could I warm this up a little bit? Yes, but then I'd also probably desaturate a little. I think you've done a good job with it. I wouldn't worry. There's nothing overexposed, nothing underexposed. It's a nice histogram. Your details are nice and sharp. Yeah. So there we go. That's why we're ending on that one, because that looks dry to start with. This one is enhanced. It's nothing. There's nothing wrong with it. Up here, if this is bugging a little bit, you could take, for example, a subtle, very subtle GND up the top. Add in a bit of saturation, because as you low down the exposure, you're going to lose some color or perceived color. And then with that GND, I might want to just take an AI eraser and erase from it. It's going to say I need to rasterize it because I can't erase from a normal graduated mask. But that's it. And all that's done is it's just balanced it out a little bit more. But yeah, there we go. So on that one, Tom, honestly, nice, works. We'll end with that. Keith, you just asked, would you ever focus stack on the moon and then sky and exposure blend? So do we use Helicon focus very often? Yes, for depth of field, not for exposure stacking. But could you exposure blend and then focus stack? Yes, you can. You just got to be very quick at it because stuff's moving and you lose it. Okay, so yeah, there you go, Tom. So made it even drier. Yeah, if you want it dry, just basically keep taking out some of the color, keep taking out the blues, keep taking out the contrast, and you're there. Right, so that's it for today. Well done, people. So Tom's shot was nice and dry. Alan's just a bit of moon recovery there. With what you had in that situation, there's no issue with that capture. It's just maybe next time try and go, ironically, a little bit darker even still. Ash with the moon, you can hopefully see the difference now between not using noise reduction and sharpening and doing it there. Roger, we need to have a play. I'll send you some options of how to check the screen, but yeah, we'll check the Firefox settings too. And yeah, Capture One still doesn't recognize my mate's face as a face. Right, between now and next time, get entering onto there, get uploading into there. Use your masterclasses if you still haven't seen them. All of that stuff's in the link below, and we'll see you next week, same time. Cheers, everyone. Bye-bye.